objects here, right? So for the same class, we are actually creating different objects, right? So we just created for two different subjects. You can see there's some maths and science. So normally in this way, maybe you may need to have, the situation will be same, but you may have to create, dynamically multiple records for these some classes. It can be embeddable class or a direct class, which is an entity class, right? So in that situation, what we'll have to do is we can go for some creation of collection items actually. So let me show you how we can actually go ahead with that. So let me just create one collection item. Now collections are same, items which we have already seen in our collections, right? So we can use the complete collections over here in Hibernate, but we have to follow certain instructions here. So let me create one collection item for my student record class, which is private. Now here, whenever the first rule is that whenever you are going to create any collection item like set or collection or anything, right, you have to use the interface of that. Interface in the sense the parent of all classes. If you are going to use any one of the sets, then you'll have to actually take up a set and then instantiate that with one of the set actually. So let's say I'm going to take a set here, which is my java.util set, and here I'm going to take student records set. Now this is my one of the set. So let me call it as L obj sets student records. Let's say this is my object name is equal to new. Now we know that set is an interface, right? We can't create an object of an interface directly. Now what we are going to do here is we are going to create one of the set item to assign this. So let's create something called hash set, which we normally use, right? Now this is how we normally create a collection item. Now but here this collection item is something which is going to be which is going to save in database. That is something which is very important here, right? Now when we created individual objects, right, which are embeddable class objects, right, so what it did is it will create a separate column for us, right, and it will actually save these things in that column. But here when we actually create multiple objects of this class in a collection item, right, now this is going to create a separate table itself, right? So it will create a separate table and it will actually insert all the records whatever we are going to add in our Hibernate source class, right, and it will actually create a reference with a primary key, right? The first step what we have to do in order to enable that is we have to add an entity called something called element collection. When you actually add element collection, now this will Hibernate will understand that yes, this is the object, this is the collection object where I am actually giving the other entity or embeddable class objects, which will create a separate table and create a mapping, right? So this is my collection item. So let's say I'm going to create getter setters for this. So I'll give you what is the column name, it will actually create and everything. Now this is my getter setter for the collection item here. Get obj set student records and get. Now here in your source class, how we can actually add the objects is it is same. You can create any number of objects of student records you want and you can directly add that to this set, because anyways we are actually while instantiating the student class itself, we are instantiating it with a new hash set. So it won't be null. You can add any number of student records you want, right? Now let us see here. Now you can see that there is S1 students 1 year where we are actually adding individual objects, right? So let's create multiple objects here. So let's say here we have collection item, which is, let's say I'm going to create student records. Let's say it is LOBJ student records SR1 is equal to new student records, let's say, right? Now again I'm going to take this student records one dot, let's say here we have something called set grade. Let's say it is some CC, and you have your object dot set percentage. Let's say this is some 85% something, and then you have grade dot set rank. Let's say some fifth rank. This is one object which we have created. Now this, what is that? Okay, this is float. You can just say some 85 dot some 65%, let's say, right? F here. Now this is one object which I have. Let me create one more object, and let me say SR2 with SR2 to here. Now let me say this is some D grade, and here is some 75, and this, let's say, rank is 15th. That's some two objects. Now these two objects are exclusive objects of student records. Now what we are going to do, instead of adding one by one student record, right, I'm going to add them to the direct collection item which we have. Now let's go ahead and add them. So which is my student S1 dot, we have something called set. You can see there is something called set LOBJ, set student records. Now I'm going to add something called LOBJ R1 first, right? So what does it say? It says set, right? That's fine. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a set first, let's say, of student records. Let me call it as LOBJ temp is equal to new, let me call hash set again, right? And here I'm going to add each and every class. LOBJ temp dot add, right, of, let's say, SR1 and the lad dot add of SR2. And once we are done with that, then let's add this temp one to here, to this object, right? Because when we want to set, we have to provide the complete set which contains all the objects which we have, right? Now this is how we normally create different objects, and these are we add. Now whenever we add this, right, so what it will do is it will actually create a students table. It will actually create a students table with these columns like user ID and name. Forget about these other objects which we have created, right? And when it comes to student records, right, it will actually create a separate table, and the table name will be like this. It will be of name called students underscore and the name of your object. So this will be the second link up table. Now we can also call it as a join table. Now this will be like you're actually joining two tables, right? So this will be the table name. And the reference, you can see in students we have actually made user ID as a primary key, right? The student user ID, you can see here that user ID is something which we have made as a primary key, right? So which means whenever we create any collection item, right, by default it will actually take the user ID as a primary key to connect students table with this second table, right? And the primary key column will be in this way. It will again take students underscore your user ID. Now this will be the column in here, and remaining columns of this table will be same as student records. Now remaining tables will be your student grade, like student grade you will be having rank, and you will be having same percentage. And this table will be connected or will be joined using your user ID. Now this is how the collection item works in here, and this is same as joining two tables with respect to one primary key, right? So this is how it is going to work on. Now you can see that now these names here are something which you may not be it may not be understandable, right? Now you can see this is something which is my object name, and I may not need the name of this table as this, right? So in that case you can actually change the name of this table whatever you want. So that we can do it while creating a collection item itself. So we can use one more entity annotation called something called, it is some table, no, not table, it is, as it is joining, so we have something called, I hope it is join table. Yep, it is join table, which is I'm actually going to join this table, right? I'm using this join table and I can give one name for this table. So let's say I'm going to give it as uh, student underscore records underscore table, right? Then this name will be replaced over here, right? The joining table name will be this now. Now this is how the name will be changed, and you can see here the primary key is user ID, and anyways even here the primary key is user ID, but the column name is different. Now here if you want to persist even the column name which is referenced, right, you can also do that part here itself. In join table itself, whatever column names or physical attributes you want to change, right, you can change here itself. Now this is again like a internal attribute override thing, where we have overridden most of the attributes, right? Same way here you can actually change your columns. Now anyways we are going trying to change columns, right? Then you have to go for join column is equal to, now basically what is the join column we have to make, which means we, as here we have one primary key which is going to join these two tables, right? Which means by default it will take this column as a join column. Now here we have to change the column name. Now how can we change column name? It will be same again, as you have to take some join column here with the name is equal to, you can just say student underscore ID, right? Or in student ID, if you are giving user ID, yes, you can give user ID also. That's right, right? So this will be the name of your join. So it is giving something, change to name, join column, you have persistence. Okay, join columns, let's take join columns here, and at the rate you have join column, you take join columns as name, it always hits something. Let me rebuild this project once. I think you have join columns here. Yes, it is join columns. Is equal to, you have at the rate join columns and the name and so on, so right, which is correct. So as we are going to join only one column, I'm going to take column name and the student ID. You don't need this, you just need join column, a single column here. So there was a simple syntax here. Now join table is something where you have to mention everything as a single entity. That's fine. Okay, syntax anytime you can get it, right? But yes, you can actually change the column names here, right? So when you say join column names, you can give multiple column names, right, where you can actually change the names. Now this will create a separate table, as I said, and it will change your column name as student underscore ID, and this will be your primary key, which will be mapped to this primary key here internally, right? Now these two will be joined, right, based on this, and this will always work for saving multiple records of this user. Let's say if there is a user of one, like user ID 1 with name, as I said, some ABC. For one, you can actually create any number of student records, right? So in this way you can actually save things in different way. So this is much better than the previous one which you have seen. Instead of creating each and every column like mass, grade, rank and all, right? So this is something which is, so yeah, sometimes you may have to go based on some requirement, but if you feel that there will be many records or dynamic records which will be generated for one particular record in the master table, right, then you can actually go for collection item, which will actually create your separate table for mapping that into mapping as a joining two tables based on a primary key. Right. Now this is how we normally create joining tables using a collection items. And in order to make this happen, you have to add the annotation called element collections, which is a class of the persistence package again, right? Now these are we can actually map things, and join table is something which is normally used to give different parameters like columns and the table name for the separate table which you are going to create. Now this is how we normally work with different entities, and this is how we normally create different things here. Okay. Now, so till this part, we have seen something on how we can actually do different tasks, right? Like joining, like creating models, right, like creating different objects in models, creating nested objects in different levels, how it will be persisted, as we have seen in, as we can actually compare the same to bean and all, right? Now, let's see how to join tables based on mappings, right? We have few mappings which are like very powerful in Hibernate here. So let's see that. So for that, let me just create separate classes here. So for this Hibernate, let's say I'm going to create a new class. So let's say it is Hibernate, let's say 2. Okay, so I'm not going to waste time in creating this main. Let me just go ahead and copy the same sessions and all, right? Let me copy the same everything, and I'll delete whatever is not needed. So we don't need the complete student or for loop and everything, right? So let me delete everything here till I have this. So, and first is the remaining parts which we have. So we don't need this commit part, right? Perfect. So let's take this. Now we have this session, and we are getting session again from globals, right? Because we have defined our session factory in globals, and begin transaction, yes. So okay, these are fine. Now let me create one more model class here. Let me call it as students1, right? Again, finish. Now here again I'm going to use the same thing. Let's say user ID and name I'm going to use, right? And this students1 is my entity table, let's say entity of Java persistent, right? And I'm going to create a getter setter for this. I'm just starting afresh so that one to one and many to one or one to many are something which is very important. You'll see that. Click on OK. Now this will create a mapping for this. Now so here I want to make user ID as a ID column, and I want to make it as a generated value, right? Where you can actually give something called strategy as let's say sequence. Now this will be my primary key in my students table, right? And remaining things will act as we have. Now here for students, let's take an example of so let me create one more model class. Now here you can see I've created one model class here, right, which is students1. Now immediately go back to your configuration, very important here, and map the student class here. So let me copy this model and call it as students1, because this is a model class which is a separate model class which I have created, but in the same package, com.c.models. Fine. Now let me create one more model class. So let me call it as, so for every student, let's say let's take an example of address. Okay, so address is, let's say it is something which is different class, and let me make it as entity class, and immediately let me just define it in here. So that address, take this address in here. So all the entity classes which we are going to use in order to get the services of Hibernate, right, it is it is mandatory that you have to use them in a configuration. Now once you define them, then it's done. Now your configuration is done. Perfect. Now in the address, let's say we have following parameters like private. So let's take it as a string. Let me call it a street name, and I have private string. Okay, string. Let's say it is street name, and let's say I'm giving city something. Let's say I have these two. Right now here, let's say I have something called. Okay, let's say I have these two columns for this entity class, and let me create getter setter for them. Now you can notice here that I'm not using any kind of relation between these two. Students one class is something which is exclusive class or entity class, and address class is something which is exclusive. Right? I'm not defining anything here, right? Address or anything. So here I'm just taking a few column names, which is street name and city, and here we have something called user ID and name. Now, so here, if you can see this part, right, this is exclusive and this is exclusive. Now here, if I can create two different objects of students one and address, so I can create it in this way, which is students one. Let me call it as s1 again is equal to new students one class. Now I can just say s1 dot set id as, now we don't need to set id, right, because we have made it as a auto sequence one. You can just set name. Let's say this is ABC, right? And then I'll create an exclusive object of vehicle here, which is, let's say I'm going to create address, which is A1, let's say, is equal to new address, and just say A1 dot set street name here. Let's say street name some name, you can say just KP, and A1 dot set city. So let's say I'm just taking it as a Mumbai, something, some name I'm just taking, right? Now this is these are two different exclusive entities we have created from two different classes. Now here I can persist these two, which means I can save S1 and immediately I can save dot save my address. Now when I save these two, right, now these two are two different tables being created in database, and there is no relation between these two initially, right, because we have created two different things and we haven't created any sort of relation between them, right? Now firstly we'll say something like, how can we join a student with an address, right? First let us say one student have got only one address, which means we are going to see one-to-one mapping, which means what I'm going to do here is, anyways the student table will be created and address table will be created, and these values will be inserted, that is for sure, and even here it will be inserted. But the thing is, we are going to map this address to this student. Let's see how we do that. Now here, in order to do that, again you have to create, as we used to create a variable, right? Variable type. In variable type or object or collection, we are going to create an object for some other entity class. Now my other entity class is nothing but as an address. Now here I'm going to create an object of address. So let's say I'm creating it as address as LOBJA something is equal to, or let me just keep it as it is, right? And for this address I'm going to create a getter and setter. Okay, so this is something where I have created my object. Now here you have to mention what is a type of what is a type of mapping you are going to do. So as we are going to do one-to-one mapping, right? So that is why we have just created a simple one-dimensional object, right? Or a single object to save one address. Now, in order to mention that mapping, so we have an annotation called one-to-one map. Once you mention this, right, and if you go back here and just say after creating address, just say s1 dot set address as a1. Right now what happens is, even now you have to save both the tables or both the entity class objects. S1 will be created, which is a separate table called students1. Address will be created as a separate table called address1. But what happens here is, it will actually create, in address table it will create one more column called user ID again, right? Because we are mapping here, the main table is student1, because we are actually creating a variable of address in my students entity class, which means it will take the current primary key, and this primary key will be created in some my address table. Now let's say, let me just show you that in programmatic way. So let me copy this student, just forget about anything else. So in this students I have user ID and name, right? So let me just keep these two. Let's say I don't have anything else. So here I don't have this, so here I don't have this, right? So I have my user ID and name, and then I have the same thing called, right, address. So in address, what we have created street name, something like street name and city I have, right? Now here we have created street name, some KP and Mumbai. Now initially when we don't have any sort of connection, right? Now this table will be created and this table will be created exclusively, and there is no relation between these two. Now when we created an object of address in students 1, right, and when we gave that I want to map one to one in students 1, which means students 1 is a source and the destination table which I want to join is address. Now that is the reason why it will create one more column in this address called students 1, which is students 1 underscore user ID. Okay, because user ID is something which is primary. Now this will act as a joining factor for students 1 and address. Right? Now this will actually create a one-to-one mapping for that. Now again, if you want to change this column name again, right, you can do that again. It is same again. So you can use your join columns again, right? Join columns, and if you want you can change even the table name address, or you can change the table name, because this name will be changed. Or else what you can do, you can directly go ahead with something called join columns, right, is equal to, you have join columns of name, oops, you have something called, why are these? Let's say I want the name is equal to let's say student ID. So student ID is something which I want to mention here. Missing attributes must have the defined attribute value. No, this is not okay. Joining column. Okay, we have taken a okay, fine, that's fine. I thought we are taking a joining table. Okay, anyways, we are taking joining column, right? So joining column is something which is user ID here, so that's why I changed. Now as as I'm using joining column, right, that's why you have to directly give value. If you are using a joining table, and inside that if you are changing your joining column, you can also do that. Now anyways, you can use your Hibernate entities, that is sorry, annotations, that is not a problem. Now this student ID will be here. Now this student ID and user ID will be the mapping key between students and address table for this particular record. So this is called as a one-to-one mapping being done between students and address, right? Now this is how you can create a one-to-one map. Now let's go ahead and see how can we create one-to-many first. Now when I say one-to-many, which means one student can have, let's say, multiple address, like temporary address and permanent address, and then in this way, right? Now let's see how we can actually do that part. Now initially you can see here that when we created student and address, right? Now as we had one-to-one, we just created and we mapped it with this. But in this case of one-to-many, so let me create one more variable maybe. Now here let me create a private address, right? So here if you want one-to-many, which means for one student I want many address tables to be saved in one table, which means with one object we can never do that, right? Now that is the reason why we will be using collection item again. So this time let me use collection. So previously we have used set, right? So let me just use something called collection here, right? So which is again in the interface of, I'm going to create a collection of address. So let me just say it as let me call it as LOBJ multi-address something is equal to new. Let's say I'm going to create some array list, basic item collection item array list, right? Now this will actually will give us an option to map students with multiple addresses. Now in order to qualify this statement, right, you have to mention what is the type of mapping you want. Now you can select one-to-many mapping. Now this is how, which means a one student can have multiple addresses, right? So that is what we are going to see. Now this is as simple as that. You can just mention one-to-many and Hibernate will take care of if you are mentioning two different addresses, right? It will create separate table where it will insert two different addresses, and both the tables will be connected with one user ID, which is one student. That is how it will be created. Now let's come back to the source class here and see how we can actually map it. Now here you can see that we have S1. So let me just remove the one-to-one mapping. Let me create one more address here, which is A2 here, and A2. Let me call it as some, so TRKP, and let me say as Hyderabad, right? Now I have two different objects. Now when I create two different entity class objects, which means you have to save them. This is important. Dot save A2, which means it will be creating two different tables for each address, but the mapping will be done based on one student with multiple addresses. Now here what we are going to do, we are going to create a collection item again, or what you can do is you can directly use S1 dot get so okay, we haven't created getter setter for this, but that is very important. We have to create a getter setter for this collection item. Let me create the getter setter. Click on OK. Perfect. Now this will give us the multi-address one. So let's take get multi-address dot add, right, of A1. This is the first address we are adding. S1 dot get multi-address dot add of A2. Now we are actually added references here. When I add this, right, internally what happens? So this is a very simple collection, operation which we are doing. But internally what happens is it will actually take up these two addresses, right? It will insert one more column called students underscore same thing, students underscore, which is user ID, student1 underscore user ID as a primary mapping key, right? And it will map, these two addresses will be mapped to one table called students table. Now this is how the one-to-many is being mapped, right? So in the same way, now here again, if you want to make sure that your column name, again the mapping column name to be consistent, right? Then you can again go for join columns here, and you can just say join, I'm sorry, I'm using column, right? Then you have to go for a value is equal to use join column here with something called name, as let's say here you have something called some student ID. You can take this. So this will actually give you, will actually change the mapping column name for this collection. Now this is how we normally say something called one-to-many mapping. There is one more mapping which we have called many-to-one mapping. Now many-to-one mapping in the sense many students can have one address, right? Let's say in one address, in one home, let us say there are three different children who are studying in in school, right? Then we have to provide same address for three different students. Now in order to achieve that, what we have to do is we will, now here the multiple things are students, but one entity is address, right? So that's why what we are going to do here is, here in the second side, right, we are going to create the object of the first entity class called student. So let me create an object of private students1, right? Object as something called lobj st1, let's say, and here I'm going to create getter setter for this, right? And here, as I'm going to give multiple options for this student, right, which means multiple addresses can have this one student, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an annotation called many to one. Now you have many annotations. You can see here you have many to many, many to any, but anything we won't use that. We use many to many or many to one. If you are using many to many, which means here again you will get a collection item, and here again you will have a collection item. You will map as a crisscross. This is something when we actually go for a complex things. Don't worry about that. We'll just learn what is many to one. Now when I say many to one, which means I can actually add multiple students to this, or what I can do, I can add a single student to have reverse mapping to this address. Now what I can do, I can just say a1 dot, I have something called set object st1, right? I can just say s1, and for the second address also I can just say s1, which means there is a reverse mapping between address to student. Now you can see multiple students. For one address, I'm actually mapping S1. In the same way, if you have one more object called S2, you can also map that to A1 again, right? Now this is how you can actually create something called many to one operation mapping between the entity classes. And one important thing is that never ever forget to have a annotations. If you miss any one of the annotation, the complete program which is based on that particular variable, right, will not work. That is very important. And one more thing is, if you don't have that, in even Hibernate will not give any error actually. That is one one thing which everyone is waiting, so that if you have that solution for that, then it will be much better actually. I hope we'll get something on that, right? So this is how we normally create something called one-to-one mapping, one-to-many. Now you can apply same thing to any combination you want to want. Now normally these are the three things which we normally use, like one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-one, most probably. And if you feel that now things go more complex, then you can go for multiple to many to many. Then when you are actually creating many to many, you have to make sure what exactly is the business you are going to apply on that. Very important part, right? So this is how we can actually do mappings in Hibernate, right? Oops.